Oh, I start in October. See, I was in chorus, so we would start like learning early. Yeah, no, we start like in August, like September, so I'm like used to it, and everyone's like, that's weird, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I started, like, I did chorus for 4 years, I started in August.
I don't think it's really but
yeah,
it's hard to listen to Christmas with one almost.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, my family officially starts listening to Christmas music over Thanksgiving. Yeah, that's when my...
You have an official start date for when you can listen to it?
It's on our drive to my dad's family.
Okay.
So, it's a 2-hour drive, so we just listen to Christmas Eve.
Yes, he is. We have a couple of bidders. Here's Dr. Weiss. We have one handout on the front table, if you would, please. Hello, Alexa. Zach, we have one handout on the front table. Yes, please, if you would.
Do you have enough?
Yeah, I've got enough. Sure. And our students really are going to be working in pairs, so they can put. That's fine. Meg, we have one handout on the front table, please.
A lot of things are going around. Like my friend who's looking like 100 years. My tonsils are just like, they were almost touching yesterday, and I went and got a strep test, and they rapid tested but I just, a lot of stuff. The time of year. And this like, she was like, yeah, I think it's a really good paper, like it's spiking, and like, the was like, well, we can't use this then again. Yeah, I didn't go to Whistler, I went to CVS.
It drives me crazy.
Drives me crazy. It's just like, we're always open, like, yeah, and then we go, and it's like, well, that is like 9 o'clock today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll struggle with my freshman year. I think one day, and I was like, okay, I know what this is. I can diagnose myself. I know exactly what this is. All I need is medication. And they were like, I just walked over there, and they were like saying, well, you need to clean it, and maybe over today. And they were like, oh, well, we just canceled, so we can, I guess, take you. I was like, I literally do not need to see anyone. I just need drugs.
Right.
Like, that's it.
I mean, I get the procedure. It's because the doctor only did this like a certain amount of times a week, and I guess but it's just like, it's hard when, I mean, there are small cases too, but like, when there's a big one, like,
Problem. Yeah.
really big problem.
Yeah.
So, I didn't wait at all.
So nice, yeah.
Then I got the flu shot though, and I'm like, I did get the shot, but it's like the next
Afterwards, yeah. Yeah.
So well.
And I get my family serious again because it didn't take when I was a baby.
I felt
So
like
I got like I got a tiger when I was working at Kennedy Krieger when someone was like, yeah, you're not like immune to Hep B. I was like, oh, great.
Do you remember those Gardasil series of 3? That is probably one of the ones that I
Yeah, I think it was like
that's giant noodle. I know, the second one is real.
I got
I think I got him in like early high school, like a long time ago, but my doctor was like, we can't do this,
How to do this, you have to do this, and they're like, oh, you got
a leg.
yeah.
I think I got him on my arm.
They were all on my arm too.
Are you going to?
I'm choosing between Synagogue and Independence School next year. Because you can go into Synagogue and after that, all of it is like medical field, which I've never had.
I've never really gotten to see it, but I've gotten them, like, I got one a couple years ago, like, but even when I
Like, I heard like the strand that they vaccinated against last year is not straight on out.
Right.
It's like that is pointless.
So I'm usually good because everybody serves anyway, so it's like better than staying in our I got it. Yeah. Where do you think you're going to end up?
My dad lived never got sick, so it's
Okay, we've got 12:30, so why don't we get started? Good afternoon, S&P.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Wednesday of a very, very big week for us. We have a visiting speaker coming in at the end of this week. We also have a visitor with us today. So in case you're wondering, the new kid in class is Dr. Weiss. He'll be with us today, and I think Friday, too, if we can persuade you to come on. So thank you for joining us during these days. I mentioned last time, and I want to reiterate that we do have Dr. Stephen Mayer coming in tomorrow. I'm actually going to the airport to pick him up shortly after noon tomorrow, and then he'll be in and around campus for the rest of Thursday and really all day Friday. Thursday night, he's going to be right next door here in Burton Morgan all the way down. He'll be talking about stress in the prefrontal cortex. And what I think is interesting about that presentation, I'm curious to see how he pulls it off, because that is geared toward what we call the PBS audience, as I've mentioned before. That's going to be a group of folks who are intellectually engaged, but the professor can't presuppose any particular kind of knowledge. So I'll be interested to see how this highly accomplished scientist works with an audience like that. That'll be 7:30 next door tomorrow night. We hope you can come out if your schedule allows. The following day, he's going to be targeting you. He's going to be targeting psychology majors, psychology undergraduates. That'll be 4:30 in the same location, Burton Morgan, all the way downstairs. And there he's going to be talking about aging and microglia. So we're looking forward to his talks and hope you can come out and join us. Okay, one other reminder is that on Friday we are going to have our student-generated discussion, and what that means is that our paper is going to be due. Our paper is going to be, broadly speaking, on power and justice issues, this time as they relate to hearing. And we have some really, really interesting, very emotionally charged issues on that topic, and I'm interested to see how you're going to come down on the different issues that we'll be discussing that day. I'll try to say go and remain quiet. You are invited to bring in a 1-minute or 2-minute video, but if you are going to do a video, please keep it fairly brief so that we can share the airtime equitably. Okay? And so I look forward to all of that. Should be a great session on Friday. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and remind ourselves of what we were doing last time around. We had transitioned in our last session over to the auditory system. And we were beginning to understand the physical properties of sound, but I also want to put it in a broader context, particularly since we have a visitor. A question that we've been asking all semester long is, why do things look as they do? And of course, we can ask, why do things sound as they do? Okay? So what would be the two typical answers to that? Why do things look as they do, or why do things sound as they do? Okay, thanks, Debbie. The world is as it is one answer to that question, right? So we do need to understand something about the physical properties of light, the physical properties of sound, okay? And that's really what we were trying to accomplish on Monday. It's one part of our answer to the question, why do things sound as they do, right? The world is as it is. And of course, the other half of that answer is because the brain is as it is, right? Why do things sound as they do? Because the brain is as it is. That's what we're hoping to get into today, something about the anatomy and physiology. So hopefully that gives you some context that also relates to what we did in vision, right? We went through the physical properties of light before we did the anatomy and physiology, and along the way we'll be talking about particular kinds of features. Okay? So hopefully that helps to orient us. Okay, so a couple of other items for review. I wonder if we can start out by doing the wave. Let's first start out by doing the transverse wave, and then we'll do the longitudinal wave. So I'll start pointing, and the students can join me in the transverse wave. Here we go. All right, these are the physical properties of what kind of energy is this? This is light, okay? Can we do now the longitudinal wave? And this will be for sound. All right, so we'll get into position for that. And we're going like this, and we're coming back over. Okay, this is longitudinal. Okay? And I'll ask us to freeze right here, okay? What did we call this? Compression, okay? And then if we unfreeze and we keep the movie going, and then we'll freeze it right there, what did we call that? A rarefaction, okay, right? So we have compressed or rarefied air, and this is happening a certain number of times per second, and that's going to be our perceptual correlative frequency, as we've mentioned. Okay, we also contrasted last time the speed of sound versus the speed of light. Can somebody help us out with some of those numbers? Speed of sound versus speed of light. Okay, thanks, Alexa.
The speed of light is about 1 million times faster.
About 1 million times faster. We were doing some scientific notation on the board the other day, and we were talking about something times 10 to some exponent, and we had a 6 exponent difference between those two, right? So it was a millionfold difference, right? And so what was the speed of light? So I'll yell it out. Go ahead, Meg.
3 times 10 to the 8th.
Yeah, 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. Okay, right? And then can somebody else help us out for the speed of sound? Jess has it.
3.1
To the second, okay? So one of those exponents is 8, the other one is 2. So there's a 6 log unit difference between those, right? 6 orders of magnitude, okay? Somebody remind us, we also gave, we tried to develop an intuition about that, right? So if something is moving 1 million times faster, somebody remember our intuition from the other day? We were talking about how fast light moves, and light would travel a certain distance. Go ahead, Meg, remember.
Is it how, like, you would think that because light goes so much faster than sound, we have a synchronization between, like, our perception of, like, if we were talking, we can see it a lot faster than we would hear it, but maybe kind of, like, compensate for that, and then at greater distances is when we notice the difference.
Excellent, excellent. Right, so our biology is slow enough that at least the distance that we're all operating on here, we have the situation where even though it's the case that the light that's coming from my mouth and bouncing onto your retinas is arriving at your retinas at a rate that is 1 million times faster than the sound of my voice is hitting your ears, it does appear to be simultaneous, and that's because our biology is slow enough to put them all on the same bus, to use the analogy that Bryn and Rachel have used, right? They all wind up on the same bus off to the cortex, okay? We also had developed the idea that we can think about how far light would travel in a second and how far sound would travel in a second. We now know those numbers, but does anybody remember how we developed that analogy or what that distance was? Yeah.
Wasn't it something like light travels like 10 times around the Earth in a second,
Okay.
whereas sound would be like the distance like of a football field?
Yeah, right, okay. So in the 1 second that we would count off, if I were to turn on the metronome, and we'll turn on a metronome later on today, we can have a photon wrapping around the circumference of the Earth 10 times. Okay, that's a pretty long distance for it to wrap around 10 times. Meanwhile, the speed of sound is going roughly, across the football field maybe once or twice. Okay, a much more modest difference. And that would be the really full length of the football field, counting the end zones and some of the regions just past that. Okay, so that gives us some idea about how these two are differing in their speeds. Okay, that was one of the extraordinary number sets that we had. We had a different extraordinary number set yesterday, and this spoke to the issue of the amplitude of sound and also the range of amplitudes over which our system can respond. Right? We had a range of intensities over which our auditory system can respond. Somebody remember what that number was? How many log unit range Zach had? 15 log unit range, okay, of intensities. Okay? And we can think of intensity again as here's Melanie's hand, here's Claire's hand. How tightly packed are those? Okay, so we can have a biological response and a psychological experience over a 15 log unit range of intensities. Okay? So then the next problem that we had was how do we figure out what 15 log units is? And we developed a scale. Can somebody help us out with that little ditty? How did that scale go? Alex has something.
It was 1 gram is 1,000. I just remember it would take 740 million Volkswagen wheels to represent like the
to round out that scale, right? Okay, so yeah, very good. So we had the idea that we're going to think about something a little bit more concrete like weight, and we can take the weight of 1 thumbtack. So if you could hear 1 thumbtack, we'll make that the softest weight we can hear. What's 15 log units heavier than 1 thumbtack? And one answer that we came to is 740 million Volkswagen Beetles. Okay? So if you think about a Volkswagen Bug, 740 million of those. Then we did one last thing to figure out how, and to more deeply appreciate how much 740 million is. Okay, what was that analogy? 740, go ahead, Yadi.
It was like if every person in the United States drove 2 Volkswagen Beetles on top of each other.
Okay, right. Okay, so we're going to take the first 310, 320, something like that, and Meg drives hers up, and then Zach drives his up, and so everybody in the country, every man, woman, and child drives one on top of the next. That gets us about half the way there. Then we do round 2, and that would get us up to approximately 740 million Volkswagen Beetles, okay, versus 1 thumbtack. Okay, so that's the range, that's the 15 log unit range that we can hear over. Okay, so that's a little review of some of the extraordinary numbers that we encountered in answering the question, why do things sound as they do? Well, because the world is as it is. We have some idea now about how the auditory system is responding and the range of intensities. Okay, we also didn't complete all of the TED-Ed questions from the other day, so I wonder if I can throw a couple of them out at you, and then we'll spend most of today on the TED-Ed questions that you had for today. But we had a couple that I just wanted to touch up. And one was about this decibel formula, right? So the bell is the unit of acoustic intensity, and we can divide that into 10 different bits, and we have a decibel, right? 1/10 of a bell is the notion there. And we had this interesting problem. The standard pressure, as we've mentioned, is 20 micropascals, and that's the softest pressure that somebody like you typically can hear. A lot of this research is based on healthy college students like you. So you can hear 20 micropascals. We're going to assume that it's a fall day and we can hear rustling leaves, and they're at 20 dB SPL, or sound pressure level of dB of 20. So how many micropascals would that be? And I wonder if somebody can briefly explain how they got there. Okay, so our formula again was dB SPL is equal to 20 times the log of those two pressures. And maybe I can call that up here in TED-Ed. And I took a peek at your TED-Ed responses, and several people responded well to it. And let's go down to here. Okay. And I think this was question 8-ish. There's our formula. Okay. 20 times log of the pressure. And here's the standard pressure, right? These are the 20 micropascals that we typically, here are the 20 micropascals, that's our standard pressure. And then we have something else. Right now there's some background noise over here. We can have rustling leaves and so forth, okay? So we were trying to figure out how many micropascals would be in this numerator, okay? In order for us to wind up with a dB SPL equaling 20. So can somebody help us out with that number? Got it right here. Okay, go ahead, Zach. Thank you. Yeah.
So, the answer was 200.
Okay.
So the way I did it was using that formula, eventually we solved the log of the pressure over 20 density line. So that gives, it has to be 200 to get a log unit.
Excellent. Okay, so you can see from the formula here that we said in the problem that we wanted this to be equal to 20, and we've already got 20 times something, so we know it has to be 20 times 1 to get to 20. Who's okay with that? 20 times 1 is 20. I haven't lost anybody yet. So this whole moderately complicated expression over here has to reduce to just 1, because we're going to multiply it by 20, given the standard formula for dB SPL. People okay with that? And we also know one other thing, that the way this had been calibrated way back when, they've used a standard pressure of 20 micropascals. So the missing variable is over here, and if we had 200 over 20, that would reduce to 10. Who's okay with that? Yeah, and then we take the common log of 10. Basically, how many zeros follow the 1 in a 10? And there's 1 0 after. So we're going to have 1 times 20 gives us 20 dB SPL. Is that working for us? So this number had to be 200. All right. So I will not give you on an exam anything that requires a lot of detail there. I won't ask you to bring in a calculator. I'll give you some numbers that are going to be really intuitive like that if this question appears at all. It'll be really intuitive. Okay, thank you. Let's go through a couple of other items. I wanted to go to question 10 in particular, and here we have students using draw to. Okay? And we're going to talk about the sine wave patterns, and we'll have them differ by a factor of 2 in frequency. So let's just go ahead and click on this. And there's our draw to. Okay? So this is working really well. We tried to keep everything the same. They have the same starting phase. Okay? Right? And we've talked before about FAPO. So the P's are equal. We don't have an O because there's no orientation in the auditory domain. The peak and the trough of this black curve are very comparable to the peak and the trough of the blue curve, so the amplitudes are the same. Okay? And you can see that we've got this one going at about twice the speed of this one. Okay? We get one compression, one rarefaction, and over here we're getting a compression, a rarefaction, a compression, a rarefaction, and they're back to the middle starting point again. So we have twice the frequency here in the black curve relative to the blue curve. So that was a good response. Who's following that? Working for us? Okay. Interestingly, this would be an octave difference. We've mentioned that once before, but we haven't mentioned it recently. And that is when you have a frequency doubling, that's going to be an octave. Okay. All right. All right. Why don't we keep on working our way through some of these questions? Okay. Here's the simple formula that we have that relates frequency to wavelength. Okay, so that was a correct answer. And it can go the other way, too. We can say wavelength is equal to 1 over frequency. And we've mentioned that a couple of times before in the visual domain, but now we're experiencing it again in audition. Okay? Okay, as the wavelengths of acoustic energy get shorter and shorter, does the perceived pitch get higher, like a flute, or lower, like a tuba? Okay, and hopefully this is very clear to all of us. Right? If we have higher frequencies, we're going to have really, really short wavelengths. Okay, and that's going to sound to us very much like the flute end of our instrumental spectrum. Okay. All right, this was very interesting, and I think this is a fun question. So here we are back at what I think Jess told us a little while ago, 343 meters per second. And we're 343 meters per second, and we want to know how long that particular cycle is if we have a particular note on the piano. So somewhere in here, if you'll let me click on that, go to the online tone generator, and I'll play this for us. There's a little more V. Okay, that is the A above middle C. Let's check that out. Let's make sure that this thing is just about right. What do you think? Is that relatively in tune? Okay, I'm a snare drummer, so my ear is not going to be as good as yours. But I think that that's a pretty good approximation that that particular note on the piano is about 440 hertz. Okay, so how we're going to approximate that. So the question then becomes, how long in space is that wave of compressed air and rarefied air? How long in space is that? And we have to put a couple of numbers together, and I think that our student did a nice job on that. Okay, we know that we have 343 meters per second is the speed of sound. Okay? And we have 440 cycles per second. Okay, so we had compressed and rarefied air 444 times per second when we're listening to that A above middle C. Okay? And then we can take just simply the division of those two numbers and we come with 0.78 meters is how long that wave is. So that wave has a compressed portion. That's going to be the top end of that wave, that sine wave, and it has a rarefied portion. It's going to be the bottom end. And that should be something like, I've got it here, 78 centimeters or 0.78 meters. Okay? So when you're hearing this tone, I'll play it again. Okay? Compressed air and rarefied air is hitting your eardrum about 440 times per second. If you looked at how long any one of those waves would be, it'd be about that long. And that's the length of the sound that you're hearing. Right? It's kind of weird to think about it that way. Right? Now suppose I take it up an octave. What's going to happen to this thing? It's going to, if we double the frequency, okay, it's going to get higher, and so what's going to happen to this? It's going to get shorter by a factor of 2. So here's the sound that you're listening to now at 440. Why don't I take it up to 880, if it will let me do that. Okay, and now let's take that down to about half the length. It's only about this long now. Okay. And all that comes out of this formula that we have about the speed of sound. Let's go back over to here. 343, and then we're going to divide that by the number of cycles per second. The first case was 440. We take it up an octave, it's at 880, okay? And we're going to have something, on the order of 78 centimeters or half that long once we double and go to the pitch that the soprano might be singing versus the pitch that the tenor might be singing. Yeah? Who's okay with all of that? Okay, pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right. And then let's see, what else do we have? Right, a simple equation to express the relationship between frequency. We've already done that one. I know. Let's go to a couple of the waveforms that are now going to be differing from each other in phase. So this is the last feature that we have. Okay, so here the question that you had for Monday again was to draw the two sine wave patterns that differ from each other by pi over 2 radians. Okay, so pi over 2 radians is a fancy way of saying 90 degrees. Let's take a look at how that one is. Okay, so here's the first waveform. Okay, we have a nice sine wave going on there. And then we're going to have one that's comparable in amplitude and comparable in frequency, but it's differing only in its relative starting position. Okay, so it's almost as if we've grabbed this thing, right over here or so and slid it back. And so now they're 90 degrees out of phase with each other. Okay, but they're the same amplitude and they're the same frequency. So there's a phase shift here. The relative position has changed. Who's okay with that? Okay, and then finally, I really like this one. Okay, we'll talk about the sine wave-based graph that demonstrates how noise cancellation headphones work. So let's take a peek at somebody's drawing here. Okay, here's intensity, here's time. We have two different waveforms, and I wonder if somebody will explain for us how that all comes together. How is this going to be working in a noise cancellation headphone? Yeah.
So in the there's in the photo shows you can do account like that kind of thing and actually add more noise, kind of create like a blank slate which ends up kind of.
Wow, that's really great. We like the idea of the blank slate. Okay, so there's some background noise in here. If I'll remain silent just for a moment, you'll hear that background noise. It's relatively broadband. There's a lot of frequencies there, but there's going to be some kind of a central frequency, okay, that's going like this. And counterintuitively, the noise cancellation headphone is going to add some sound. It's going to figure out what the primary frequency is. It will match that frequency, but it will have the complementary phase. So as this one's going up, it adds noise that's going down. As the regular stimulus out there in the environment, the pre-existing stimulus is compressed, it adds a rarefaction. And as the actual stimulus is rarefied, it adds a compression. And so that zeroes out. I love the idea of the blank slate. And so you turn that switch, and on comes more noise that actually cancels out the background noise by taking advantage of the phase difference. Who's following that? Is that working for us? Yeah? Okay. All right, so that's, how many people do have noise cancellation headphones? Has anybody heard them before? Maybe you've got friends, okay? Well, that's the technology. And it's really cool that there are some ergonomically oriented psychologists that will try to make quieter cabins for you to travel in when you're on an airplane or in a car, and they're taking advantage of this kind of technology. There's something out there that detects the initial frequency and phase, and once they've got that, they can match all those things and just add a 180-degree phase shift, and away goes the background noise. It's pretty cool. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Okay, so that brings us through the end of last session when we're really focusing on these physical properties of sound, right? Answering our question, why do things look as they do? Well, because the world is as it is. We now know something about the physical properties, how fast the sound is moving, how long middle A would be, how do noise cancellation headphones work, and so forth. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do now is have you teach each other. We'll do a little session here, when I teach, I learn, and we'll have you pair up. And these are the questions that you've already responded to, but for today, those other ones were from Monday's session. Does everybody have one of these? Okay. We'll let you get into pairs, and maybe we'll give you 5 minutes or so. One of you will be teacher, one of you will be learner, okay? And if we need to have a trio or two, that's fine. And then we'll come back as a group and we'll see how people did on these TED Ed questions, okay? So why don't you find a partner or a trio, and I'll give you 5 minutes. One person's the teacher, one person's the learner. Page 1 in its entirety, please. We'll do questions 1 through 9. And I wonder if we can do it this way. If you're on this side of the room, can you start at question 9 and work backwards? And if you're on this side of the room, can you start at question 1 and work forward? That way we've got the whole thing covered in about 5 minutes. Okay, we'll give you 5. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. We can kind of compare that to how we go from the larger eardrum to the smaller open window, where like that noise is amplified through that smaller chamber. So yeah, that's what I had in there. Overload protection. So we use reflex types. Overload protection prevents us from getting
Let's do 2 more minutes. Do another 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's what it's like. But I understand. It's like, physics lesson, so I was like, cool. Yeah, and like, there's no ear and spot behind it, but it's just takes down the so since the middle ear is that area that sounds out.
What are some fun facts you found out about
This is when they cut the analogy in the video. Yeah. How much you're at the therapy. We would thinking a little bit, but not a lot. So I was like focusing background. I know. I remember from prom, it's like thinking about the same way you're
And I'm trying to explain like the acoustic reflex versus the overload protection is we're trying to figure out the difference, and we came up with that like overload protection is the term kind of for like the overall
Exactly.
like what and then like the acoustic reflex is the physical thing that
That's the
happens.
mechanism that permits us to have overload protection.
Okay.
Right. Okay, you may or may not be done. Why don't we come back as a group, and now that we're prepared to speak, we'll see how folks are doing, and maybe we can divvy up the airtime here. So let's go to question 1 and 2. Let's start out just with the pinna, what it is and what it does for us. Anybody, maybe over on this side, want to help us out with? Okay, thanks, Liz. Yeah.
So the pinna is part of the outer portion of the ear, and basically it gathers sound and funnels it into the ear canal.
Okay.
Which is the middle ear.
Okay, right. It's the part that we see. Interesting factoid about this. We're going to have a question coming up for other fun factoids about hearing and audition and so forth. These actually never stop growing. Isn't that cool? It's one part of the body that never stops growing. Your pinna. So if you ever wonder why it seems that some older folks have really, really large ears, it's just because their pinnas never stop growing, and neither will yours. Right? It's an interesting anatomical fact. Okay, they never stop growing. Okay, they do funnel the sound for us. Abby had her hand up also. Maybe Abby also wants to do question 2. What is another name for the eardrum, and why is that structure named as it is? Did you get to that one, or maybe? Okay.
I know, but it's called the tympanic membrane.
Okay.
Because they're like drums that are like called.
Okay. Like timpani, okay, right? So that's where that name comes from. I do this every year. I try to sneak in before the class before us, and I put over here the oval window. Right, okay, so there's a sheet of paper there that is oval. That's going to be one side, and that's going to be, so this is going to be our air-filled chamber today. And over here we have the tympanic membrane. And sound is going to be coming from out there. Dr. Mayer is going to be speaking really loudly out there. It's going to be hitting this membrane, the tympanic membrane, and it's going to move. We're going to have the ossicles in just a moment working to hit this oval window. I think it helps us sometimes to be in a room where we've got the physical layout of the anatomy that we're discussing set up for us in a way that it's really, really easy to see. Okay, so that is the tympanic membrane. That's the larger of the two, and that'll be important in just a little while. Okay, can we have somebody compare and contrast transduction in vision and in hearing? Somebody want to help us out with that comparison? Okay, we'll go back to Liz again.
So simply for transduction and vision, it's more about like the electrical process.
Okay.
And then for the transduction and hearing, it was more about like, it's like more mechanical.
It's a very mechanical process. Okay, so in either case, it's transduction, so we have to take some kind of energy from the environment, the distal stimulus. It's now reaching the nervous system somehow. That becomes the proximal stimulus. We need to convert the physical energy out here into some kind of action potential. Okay, and we do that through a very chemical process in vision. We have, you show me, what was the, how did the cis-trans isomerization look? Can we all do that? That's our cis-trans isomerization, okay? What is the, I'll keep my hands behind my back, what was the gesticulation for transduction in the auditory domain? Can we all show us, there it goes. Abby's got it, Meg's got it. Okay, we're all doing that. Okay, you're showing some mechanical force. Okay, that's how transduction is going to work there. Okay, all right. All right, now this one's a little bit weirder. Number 4, impedance matching. First question, before we even get to that, well, let Sarah take this one. How many people had never heard of impedance matching before taking this class? Okay, so a totally new concept. Do you want to take a crack at it, Sarah?
So that the middle ear has to amplify sound in order for the inner ear to hear sort of the same sound because it's off the fluid field that has no resistance.
Excellent, excellent. So right now, in the analogy we were developing a while ago, we are all in the middle ear, which is air-filled, okay? And so we're getting some vibrations over here on this tympanic membrane. We need to move those through this air-filled chamber over here to this oval window. What was that thing that was banging on this, by the way? There's some, what was that called? It's one of the ossicles. Which one was it? Kind of like the bass drum. Stapes? Yeah, okay, right, okay. And we need to now get some kind of a wave going in there, and that's going to be fluid-filled. And we do need to match those impedances, right? We do need to match those resistances. Yes, please.
There's
sound does travel faster in fluid.
Why is it more resistance? Like, what does that mean there's more resistance?
What does it mean that there's more resistance? I offer it to you this way. Have you ever tried, and I've alluded to this in the video, typically when you're out running, you have a certain amount of resistance from the air. Suppose you're getting hit by a 40-mile-an-hour wind. It's probably going to be slowing you down, right? Suppose you're not being hit by a 40-mile-an-hour wind, but instead you're now running through a pool, right, okay? Do you get the sense that it's harder to move through? Okay, that's all we mean by resistance, okay? So the same motion in your arms is going to be harder to do in a thicker medium, even though it's the case that the sound will actually propagate faster, okay? Yeah, those are distinct concepts, but it's a good question. It's a good question. Okay, to stay with this, we're up to question 5, so overload protection. Okay. Claire's got something.
Overload protection is another mechanism of the middle ear.
Okay.
And that's pretty much going to be when the tympanic membrane is stretched out or made stiff so that it can't bounce anymore. It can't send back any more noise waves into the inner ear because proximal noise is going to be a lot louder than just noise being sent to you from other places. So like me talking right now is sending out a much louder thing than my ears actually picking up.
Okay. Really good, yeah. So it would be very easy for us to blow our ears out. Right? There's a lot of acoustic energy floating around, and when we're speaking or when we're sneezing or when we're chewing, we need somehow to momentarily, if you will, deafen the ear, maybe not entirely, but at least to some extent, and that's going to be the notion of overload protection. Okay, so how do we get there? How do we get to overload protection? What's the mechanism that gives us that overload? Go ahead, Ned. The acoustic reflex. Okay, and in the acoustic reflex, we're going to have essentially a tightening of all those ligaments that are holding together the different ossicles, so they become a little bit less sensitive, and that's a good thing because otherwise we would have the situation where the acoustic energy would blow away our anatomical apparatus, and we don't want to have that. And we're going to see some amazing biological complexity on Monday, not Friday, but on Monday. We talk about bats that need to send out a signal that's fairly loud, and then they're going to wait for an echo to come back. But when they're sending it out, they need to deafen themselves. Okay, and then when they're receiving it, they need to be very sensitive. And this is happening many, many, sometimes thousands of times per second. Okay, so you need to have that acoustic reflex turning on and off, an unimaginable number of times per second. Okay, really cool that all this is going on. Okay, somebody want to help us out with the levers? Fun facts about levers, okay? Yeah.
So one fact is another biological lever is like your arm and your joints, the fulcrum, and the muscles like help move the load.
Okay. All right, so yeah, it looks like evolution has stumbled upon levers in lots of ways, right? We have levers, ossicles are helping us amp up the signal from that relatively large area over there to a smaller area over there. Our arms and our legs can be thought of as levers. Okay, some other fun factoids about levers. Meg's got something.
There's 3 different classes of levers.
Okay.
Class 1 is has the fulcrum between the load and the force, so like a seesaw.
Okay.
For example, class 2 has the load between the force and the fulcrum, so like a wheelbarrow or a stapler.
Okay.
And then class 3, the force is between the fulcrum and the load, like tweezers or tongs.
Wow. Okay. I actually didn't know that we had those classifications, but okay, pretty cool. Pretty cool. So you can imagine then that the biology can begin to exploit any of those when it's trying to solve some kind of a problem, like maybe impedance matching. Okay. All right. I'm sure we have other fun factoids, but why don't we keep on going? We've already talked about the acoustic reflex. The middle ear is fluid-filled. Air-filled versus fluid-filled for the inner ear, so we've kind of already done that. Why don't we end this little section with a conversation about the stiletto heel? Okay, and I think Jess has her hand way up for that one.
Those are an analogy for the tympanic membrane between the ossicles.
Okay. Okay, all right, really good. Right, so we have a certain amount of pressure over here, okay? And we want to amp that up because we've got a fluid-filled chamber over on this side. It is advantageous that this oval window is so much smaller, right? Because we can take that energy and now focus it into a smaller region of space, a smaller surface, and that's kind of like walking either barefoot, a relatively large, flat heel, versus walking on a stiletto heel, right? Which is going to be very, very narrow and go deeply into the ground. Same total amount of weight, but it's happening over a smaller region of space, so we get more pressure going down. So that's one of the ways that we can do this impedance matching, and we've also got the lever system working for us. So we have those too. Okay? Who's all right with all of that? Yep. Okay, I'm looking at the clock. We're doing fairly well on time, but I did want to have time to do a couple of demos, and we'll see if we get there. So I was going to put you into groups, and if you were a teacher a moment ago, I was going to have you be student on the next set of questions. But why don't we just do these en naturel, the next set of questions. So question 10, in your own words, what is meant by the informal phrase, most favored hair cell status? Alex has something.
There are more afferent neurons going to the nerves connected to the inner ear than the outer ear.
Okay, the inner hair cells.
Inner
hair cells, okay.
The outer hair cells.
Right.
And so they have more say, I guess, in perception.
Okay, right. So we have these different kinds of hair cells, just like we have different kinds of photoreceptors, and we have different kinds of hair cells, and we classify them as inner and outer. But one of them is more favored when we think about how much innervation is provided by the 8th cranial nerve, right? The acoustic nerve. Okay, and we have many more fibers from the acoustic nerve going to inner hair cells than to outer hair cells. Okay, all right, so, and we'll come back to that in just a little bit. I do want to talk for a moment about the temporal theory, and then maybe we'll do a couple of demos here. So Melanie's already jumping in on the temporal theory. Okay.
So the temporal theory basically says that as frequency increases, the amount of action potentials fired will increase.
Okay.
But there's a problem with this in that neurons have like an absolute refractory period of about 1 millisecond.
Okay.
So that would mean that, like based on this theory, we would be able to hear frequencies greater than 1,000 hertz.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so the idea was, and this wasn't a bad way of thinking about it, and it might even be true that part of the way that we code the different frequencies is something like a temporal theory, and we'll go with the simplest example of one action potential per cycle of compressed and rarefied air. Okay, so in comes one cycle, you get an action potential. In comes the second cycle, you get another one. And so if we hear this 880 hertz tone, okay, right, that would be the second A above middle C. We have compressed and rarefied air 880 times per second. So you can imagine that you could have one neuron or maybe a family of neurons that are firing at that rate. The problem is we can hear things much higher than that. Just to give you a couple of examples, we can go up even to 5,000. Most of us have no trouble hearing that. A little bit annoying, okay? But we don't have any one cell that can fire anywhere nearly that quickly, okay? So it might be true that we have this temporal coding down at the low end of our frequency range, but it can't really be true that we have it for the higher frequencies, right? The neurons are just not fast enough. This is true really for all mammals. It's not just a human thing. And the mammalian speed limit is about something like 1,000 hertz firing, right? So you get 1,000 action potentials per second, if you're lucky, which is a refractory period of 1 millisecond, okay? Okay, so then let's go on to, can somebody help us with the Bali theory? And we'll go with Zach. Thanks, Zach.
Because, like you said, that no single neuron can fire at that rate. The Bali theory is that they fire sort of in succession to achieve the same rate.
Okay, right, so they're firing in succession. They're almost cooperating. It's not entirely clear how they would be cooperating, but if they were to cooperate, then you could take a cell that can fire 1,000 times per second, and do that with this hand, and we can interleave that with a cell that's firing 1,000 times per second, and they're just slightly out of phase with each other, okay? So collectively, these two are now up to 2,000 hertz, okay? So let's just see if we can do that, and we'll see how this might get to be a little bit tricky. I'm going to go to the virtual metronome. Okay. We're going to pretend that's happening at 1,000 times per second. Okay, so we've slowed this way down. This is now slow motion. And I'm going to be clicking away up here. Okay. Now, can you all play offbeats from me? Okay, so collectively, we've now encoded something that's twice as fast as any one of us could have done. Right? So we are collectively playing eighth notes, if you will, even though any one of us is only playing quarter notes. Who's okay with that? Is that working for us? Yep, all right. Just to have some fun with this, can we now have this? We'll try to do triplets. So I'm going to go, we'll do it like this. We'll have this half clap immediately after me, and this half immediately after them. So it'll go something like this. Okay, now I'm going to time with this, right? So you get the idea. And you can see how difficult this is to do, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and play and... It's hard to do the volley theory, okay? And we're only at, that would be 180 beats per minute, okay? And so not a whole lot there. One more time, why don't we do this group? We'll try 16th notes. So we're going to go 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and so you're immediately after me. You're on the and, okay? And then you're on the Let's start out with this group. We'll go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's turn that down. We're not going to get there with this thing, okay? And then we'll interleave this, okay? So. Okay, do you want to try to get in between those two? 1E and, 2E and, 3E and, 4E and, 1E and up, 2E and up, 3E and up, 4E and. We're not going to get there, okay? So you can see that even trying to interleave 4 is going to be really, really difficult. We just played you a 5,000 hertz tone. We'd have to interleave 5 to get there. And we can go all the way up to 22,000 hertz. So in principle, that could work, right? But in practice, you see how difficult that is, okay? All right. All right, there's one other point I wanted to do by demo. Students usually like this, and we'll close with this one. This will take about 5 minutes or so. What we're going to do is we're going to try to demonstrate the distinction between inner hair cells and outer hair cells. We've already said that we have the most favored hair cell status. Typically what happens is that the inner hair cells are picking up these sounds as they're coming in. The outer hair cells almost have this top-down function. That is, they're trying to select certain stimuli while excluding other kinds of stimuli. It's almost like a filtration process, almost like auditory attention. So what I typically do here in this demo, which you may have done in Intro to Psych, this is called Dichotic Listening. We're going to ask for a student volunteer to come on up and tell a story, maybe about their siblings or about high school or something like that, for about a minute. And we want you to stand here and reach your audience. It's going to be on the diagonal side of the room. Okay, so we'll see if somebody would be kind enough to volunteer and just tell us a story for about 30 seconds or a minute. We'll have somebody else stand over here and look at your audience diagonally and tell a story. And the two of you are going to be speaking simultaneously. If you're in the audience, we want you to tune in to one of those stimuli and exclude the others. Okay, you're going to be tuning into the one that's diagonally positioned from you. Do we have any volunteers to come up and just blather on almost any topic? It doesn't really matter what the topic is. Thanks. Okay, thanks, Meg. Come on up. Somebody else want to come up and blather? Okay, thank you, Alexa. Meg, if you could stand there. Alexa, and Meg, your audience is over on this side of the room. And Alexa, your audience is over on that side of the room. Okay, so that's your audience. And the two of you will be talking at the same time, okay, about almost any topic. But try to tell a semi-coherent story, okay? It can be real, it can be fictional. You can talk about some aspect of your life, some aspect of your parents' life. Okay, why don't we go ahead?
So my sister cancer sitting on the play, and she had a clown actually, and we were at Navy, and actually tripped staying at my cabin that they have up there, and so then when she got up and I went to play at the beach, and we found her.
All right. Can we have a round of applause? Can we have a round of applause for our volunteers here? Thank you. That was a lot of acoustic energy. All of the acoustic energy reached your ears at the same time. Interestingly, if you're on this side of the room, you are not listening to Alexa, and yet her voice was slightly louder, other things equal, because she's a little bit closer. And also, her voice is getting there just a little bit sooner, very, very marginally sooner. And Meg's voice was coming in, presumably softer, all other things equal. So what was Meg talking about? Anybody over here? Okay.
My sister and I went to camp, and I missed how she fell, but she fell and chipped her tooth in like a certain shape, but the rainbow shape, and then she got up and was holding like this little chip tooth.
Okay, and what was going on in Alexa's story?
Something about her sister going to Canada. They went to the beach.
Oh, you got that. Okay. Sometimes we can't get that much. All right, over here. So what did we get from Alexa's story? Yeah, okay.
She went to swim back with her sister, and
Okay, all right, that's about when the story ended probably. Okay, all right. But the idea is this. This happens all the time. We're in an acoustic mess. And somehow we have to make some sense out of it, and it's actually the outer hair cells that are going to start saying, okay, pick up on this stream of frequencies and ignore that stream of frequencies. So even though the inner hair cells are actually steering the ship in the sense that they're doing the transduction for us, or disproportionately so, they're actually not picking up on the top-down signals, which is what you need to do when you're trying to hear Meg while excluding Alexa or vice versa. And we're just about out of time. So thanks again to our volunteer speakers. I look forward to Friday's session when we're going to put these in a circle, as we always do. I'll say go. Remember, if you do have a video, 1 or 2 minutes, not longer than that, so we can share the airtime. Thanks for a great session.
Yeah, I think we were desperate.